Welcome to Philosophy Slam, the podcast, with myself, Mark Vernon, and my friend, Robert Rowland Smith. Hi there, Robert.
Hello, Mark. Good to see you, hear you.
We get together because we love words, I think, and love ideas, and love them in the philosophical sense, but also the psychological and the literary, the ancient, the modern, and this thing called Philosophy Slam, the podcast, has given us a way sort of doing nothing more than just taking delight in how ideas can take you in all sorts of directions that you just didn't anticipate even a few seconds before you suddenly saw the path opening up before you.
Exactly that, yeah. And it has its origins, Mark, in our live, sold-out, arena-filling performances at places. Well, now we do regularly performances around London at members' clubs. And the idea is that an audience member throws out a single word and we riff on it, and then we'll get another word. And sometimes we try and make connections between the two words, or even three words in some cases. And that's the idea for this podcast. And I was just thinking, one of our recent Philosophy Slams was at the Union Club in Soho. Two of the words that came out then we had, that I remember anyway, were forest and alignment. So we thought, Mark, we'd bring those back into view. I can't remember what we said at the time, maybe a little bit, and see what we can make of them today. Again, Mark, you don't have to try and remember all the brilliant things you said when we were asked in person, but where did your mind go to first today?
Well, actually, just as an aside, of course, the funny thing about improvisation is that if you try to remember, then you start to stumble. You've got to sort of reach for the moment, so it's going to be fresh and different. But the thing that comes to my mind just immediately is this expression of not being able to see the wood for the trees, and I feel like that can somehow open up some kind of pathway between the two words of forest and alignment, because being able to see the wood for the trees must be about being able to take a perspective on something. So being able to either mentally or actually step back so that you can, in your field of view, get the wider vision that enables you to have a take on what you're looking at, as opposed to just be immersed and lost in what you're looking at. So, in other words, be able to see the wood for the trees. And so your alignment with what you're contemplating is absolutely crucial. If there's no distance between you and what you're contemplating, then it's going to overwhelm you. And psychologically speaking, maybe that is one definition of being overwhelmed, that there's no distance, there's no alignment, there's no perspective. You get lost in the event, in the moment. So having perspective enables you to not just find a take on something and keep a mind about it, but maybe even to find a new alignment in relation to it as well. And that is going to be really important for change and for development. So, the forest, metaphorical or literal, when it is too close, too daunting, your only response can be one of terror or fear. How am I going to survive the proximity of this dark woods? To reference one of my favorite people, Dante, famously waking up in a dark wood, having wandered from the path. But conversely, being able to take a step back, come into some sort of alignment with this metaphorical forest, and even then finding a new kind of alignment, that's a wonderful thing to be able to do, because that is about development and change. So look, that's what happened to me with forest and alignment. What happened to you?
Well, we should come back to Dante, because the forest is such a trope in literature. But you used the word perspective there, and we're recording this with you in South London and me in North Oxfordshire. Down the road from me in the Ashmolean Museum is a famous painting by Paolo Uccello. I can't remember exactly when it was painted, 15 something, called A Hunt in the Forest. And this painting is famous because it is thought of as the first and finest, perhaps, example of the use of perspective in painting. Now, it's extraordinary to me that perspective had to be invented, that it wasn't just there, but apparently it was quite late in arriving in the world of the visual arts. And it is a widescreen painting. It's very, very landscapey. And it features a dark forest. I think they're beech trees or quite pale trunks, but very dark, sort of chiaroscuro effect, with hunters on horseback and hounds running through the forest. And it's a sort of visual trick because the trees serve to punctuate and measure really the distance from the viewer to the back of the forest, the illusory back of the forest. Clearly, the painted trees get smaller the further you go back. So it's literally about perspective and demonstration, really, that the two-dimensional surface of the painting can create the illusion of the three-dimensional in some ways. And therefore, it's as if to say, it's a bit like, I think, my experience when the internet was first discovered. There is another dimension. I mean, there's literally another dimension here. You go on your computer and suddenly the world is available to you. It must have been a sort of similar experience, I think, for those people encountering perspective for the first time. But of course, it's perspective in both senses, as you say, because it's perspective literally being able to see through to the back of the painting. But it is also perspective in your sense. You're now getting a kind of whole view, which you might not have otherwise done before. So you are seeing the forest as well as the trees.
I find this question of whether perspective was invented and what it took for that to happen very, very fascinating. I'm influenced in my understanding of it by Owen Barfield, who was one of the Inklings, great friends of J.R. Tolkien and Lewis, so nice Oxford connection there. But Barfield, along with Lewis and Tolkien, actually, they were very interested in how human consciousness has changed. And by that, they meant how the experience of the world has evolved over time, not in terms of decades, but in terms of centuries. And so when you start to see new things emerging, that's because a new kind of consciousness has emerged, not just that a technique has been discovered. And I think the perspective is quite a good case in point, actually, because if you look at certain Roman mosaics and murals, for example, there is perspective. They could, as it were, do foreshortening. They could do the lines that would make things disappear to a kind of horizon. Foot foreshortening, actually, itself has a history in terms of pots. It comes in around the 5th century, 500 BC, as I remember right, in Gondrych's The Story of Art. But for Barfield, what this is about is that there's a new kind of experience of life that has emerged, that is the imaginative preparing the ground for perspective then not just to be a side issue in art, but to become one of the main issues in art. And so, like you're saying, in this Renaissance period, it starts to be used more and more, and then you get it theorized, and then great artists like Piero della Francesca not only create extraordinarily perspectival paintings, but also write books of theory about it and link it to Platonic solids and give it a kind of spiritual aura, in fact. And so I find that idea of perspective helps me understand, why and when, but also amazing as heavily perspectivized paintings can be. It really is the joy of looking onto an image that, well, it doesn't look like a photograph, actually. It looks like an image that has gone through a human mind. So it's like you're seeing almost through the artist's eyes rather than just a kind of image that's being captured in a more neutral way. But at the same time, Barfield said there's a downside to all this, which is that the kind of sense of yourself it cultivates is a bit like a camera. That much as nowadays we love to go around capturing images on what used to be called mobile phones, a younger person in my life just the other day was saying we don't call them mobile phones anymore because it's not really used to call people, I suppose. Anyway, that's by the by. But this idea of the pocket camera that you carry around with you, and really experiencing something, you have to have caught it in the camera in some way. Barfield said this is the kind of end point of the emergence of perspectivism in human consciousness, because we've almost forgotten now how to participate in something, how to step into it, how not to feel we have to have this standing back take, but the immersion. So in a funny sort of way, it's sort of it's the opposite of having a perspective, having an angle, and instead is how you can throw yourself back into something.
I mean, there's probably good immersion and bad immersion. If I come back to the notion of the forest itself, and I mean, Mark, you're the Dante expert, so I'll only touch on this briefly, but at the opening of Dante's Divine Comedy, obviously another hugely important work of medieval literature, it begins with the idea of being in the dark forest, La Selva Oscura. And I think there is a direct link with the idea of alignment or misalignment here, because Dante is sort of saying, I'm in this dark forest because my life is out of alignment. I'm on the wrong path. This is a deviation or a digression from the path, the true path, the one path, or what have you. So in there, the forest captures a sense of spiritual drift, I think. And I was thinking also of the Forest of Arden in Shakespeare, where the forest is a place of Dionysian disruption. Also, you get it in Milton, for that matter, in Comus, I think it is, where the lady wanders off into a forest. It's a place where unlicensed sexual activity takes place, drunkenness, violence, the world turned upside down, rules don't apply, there are shadows, it's a place of the devil, and so on. And I think, Dante's Dark Forest is alive with all of those references, but it's precisely the forest as place we lose ourselves in, which is dark and shadowy, compared with the place of light, which, well, in Dante might be the church, but in other secular traditions might be the court or might be the city. These are places of civilization, precisely not places of trees, trunks, and darkness, and people hiding behind trees and weird perspective. And in those places, alignment is possible. You can come back, into true, as it were. So the question then is, with what should we align, or with whom should we align? Now, in Shakespeare, often, in a way, what you're trying to align with is power, the powers that be. You're trying to align with the king or whatever, so that you're in the right place. You're not out of place, and that's what alignment is. In this work, we're both interested in systemic constellations. Alignment happens when we belong in the right place. We're aligned. We're not bigger or smaller than certain people. We feel like we haven't preceded our parents, for example. We're not too big for our boots. We haven't got ideas above our station. If we're in organizational constellations, it can be very simple things like, if you're not the boss, you don't act like the boss. You should be in an alignment with the hierarchy, actually. And it's quite an interesting idea that when you're aligned, you belong better. And when you belong better, you're more free. So alignment can actually, the fitting in, can produce the greater freedom than the sense we have of getting away from it all and wandering off and ending up in the forest for all these other potentially nefarious activities.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think is Dante's point, partly because there is the dark forest at the beginning of the Inferno, but there is actually another forest in the Divine Comedy, which is at the end of the Purgatorio. So at the top of Mount Purgatory, they enter a region that's sometimes called the Earthly Eden, and it's a forest. It's a kind of enchanted forest rather than a dark forest. And I think the contrast that Dante's making there is that the enchanted forest is one that's aligned towards what's good, beautiful, and true, whereas the dark forest is the one that's become confused about its alignment. And for Dante himself, what this alignment is about virtue and vice. So if you think about virtue and vice, not in a moral sense, as if, that's a good thing to do, sort of check, I'm all right. But as a sort of character that you have, do you incline towards the virtues that mean you can be well aligned, or do you incline towards the vices that actually turn you out of alignment? And I think what Dante discovers in the Dark Forest is that the things he thought were the virtues leading him towards the light had actually become vices without him even realizing. And sometimes it's said that the beasts that Dante meets in the Dark Forest, the prancing leopard and the hungry she-wolf and the proud lion, are his virtues become vices, and they're now blocking the way. They're adding further twists and terrors to the darkness of the wood. But when he enters the earthly Eden, the enchanted forest, he starts to notice things. He notices that the wind is blowing towards the sun, and with a very steady, lovely breeze. And then he notices that the trees are actually drawing their sustenance and their goodness from the heavens, not from the earth. And he also starts to notice how there's a sweet music on the air that seems to be what he felt might be the rustling of the leaves, actually kind of playing a song. So even the interactions of things is aligned in order to make a kind of music. And then I think the game is given by, much as in the Dark Wood, these beasts had arrived, his kind of virtues prancing in front of him so he can see them for the first time. So his vices prancing in front of him. Now in the enchanted woods, the virtues themselves appear, the 4 traditional virtues and then the 3 Christian virtues as well. And they are like nymphs in the wood. They're the kind of spirits of the wood, if you like. And they dance around him, and then they advise him, and they look into his eyes. And he's on a kind of virtuous spiral now, which is what's preparing him for the 3rd stage of the journey, which is to step into paradise itself. So this other wood is like a reorientation, a realignment that readies him for paradise, whereas the Dark Wood had been the place where he realized that he wasn't aligned and was, kind of all over the place.
I didn't know that, or I'd forgotten it, that there was this the kind of second redemptive word almost in Dante. It's interesting to know. I was thinking, back on the word alignment for a moment. It's a word used a lot in organizations. Are we aligned around the strategy? Are we all aligned on the way forward? But of course, I think most people in common parlance use the word when we say things like, oh, the stars aligned, or the spheres, the planets aligned. We talk about that, often humorously. But I think there is still this notion of alignment being something which produces a propitious time. We will act when, it's the full moon, or we won't act when it's the full moon, or we'll do something on the 1st of the month, or we'll do something on the 21st of the month because it's my birthday. We'll do things in accordance with some sort of heavenly or astrological calendar. Because if we can do that, then the resistance that life otherwise strews across our path will be removed. And the idea then is that, in a way, our task as human beings is kind of to get out of our own way. Because if we just follow our own earthly agenda, I want to move there, fall in love with that person, make this amount of money, get that job, the chances are we'll fumble a bit and end up in that dark forest again. Whereas if we follow the precepts that are written in the stars, we'll have a more dependable kind of guide, I suppose. And that spares us. I mean, the downside of that is that in a way that makes us passive followers of the alignment of the stars and astrology. I won't do that because because I'm a Sagittarius and the moon is in Capricorn or whatever. So it can remove agency, but at the same time, I think it probably gives a great sense of being in contact with the cosmos. And I was thinking of Chaucer, who is not quite contemporary with Dante, but we can sometimes categorize these things together, and just how much he played with that idea of whether earthly events were or weren't a mirror of what was happening in the skies, whether we were or weren't aligned with the movement of the planets. And this was at a time, as you know, and for Dante as well, where there was no distinction between astrology and astronomy. And taking the stars very seriously was what sort of more or less everybody did. There was no astrology in that rather cod psychology way we have today. But it's a rather beautiful idea that there could be a sort of heavenly grid that we might seek to align ourselves with in some way.
That is a lovely idea. It takes my mind a final thought from me to the word intelligence, and how intelligence used to mean fitting your mind to the cosmic mind, to the divine mind, so that alignment actually was an expansion of your intelligence, because it was working with the flow. It was going towards the infinite. So, we've come a long way from the dark woods, I'm glad to say, in a true Dante spirit, with uplifting thoughts of alignment as well. Robert, once again, thank you so much. I didn't know this was going to go, and it certainly has gone somewhere.
It has. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, everybody. Like and subscribe, do all those things.
Remember the Philosophy Slam, the podcast, and we look forward to you joining us next time.